My father fired me from the company I built, so my brother could be CEO because he was born to lead. Months later, their empire collapsed. They begged me to save it, and I made them sign it over before I'd even consider walking back through the door. Hey, Reddit! My family thought I'd slave away building their empire while my golden boy brother took the credit. So I said, screw that, built something of my own, and walked away. But they weren't finished with me yet. Let me start from the top. My name is Oscar Cross. I'm 35 years old, and for more than a decade, I've been the Chief Operating Officer of CrossTech. On paper, I run one of the fastest-growing AI infrastructure companies in North America. In reality, I built it. Every system, every patent, every major client win, since the company's early days, has my fingerprints on it. CrossTech started as my father's idea in a cramped two-room office back in 2008. Martin Cross, 62, had the vision, but not the execution. I supplied that. I took us from a family-run operation scraping together contracts into a powerhouse that peaked at a $2.5 billion market cap, trusted by defense agencies, Fortune 500 firms, and city governments. My younger brother, Luther, is 3 years my junior and the opposite of me in every possible way. I'm the engineer, the architect, the one who understands the guts of what we build. Luther is the face, polished, photogenic, and painfully shallow. He spends more time at charity galas and in front of cameras than he ever did in a development meeting. He's contributed nothing to the systems that made CrossTech successful, but my father adores him anyway. For years, I believed results would speak louder than charm. I assumed that when Martin eventually stepped down, the obvious choice to lead would be the man who built the company's core technology from the ground up. That assumption was shattered on a bright Thursday afternoon in May. The CrossTech Global Investor Summit is the biggest event on our calendar. Every major client, investor, and media outlet attends. We use it to showcase new projects and announce future plans. I'd spent weeks preparing my keynote presentation, a live demo of a breakthrough AI optimization framework we'd been developing. I was backstage reviewing final notes when Martin took the stage. As expected, he opened with the usual speech about CrossTech's rise, our expanding global footprint, and the future of infrastructure AI. Then, his tone shifted. He paused, adjusted the microphone, and delivered a sentence that would change everything. As CrossTech enters its next era, I am proud to announce that my son Luther Cross will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer, effective next quarter. For a moment, I thought I misheard. The room erupted into applause, cameras flashing. Luther strode onto the stage in a tailored navy suit, grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery. My name wasn't mentioned until Martin wrapped up by calling me the technical foundation of our past successes. It felt less like praise and more like a consolation prize. I forced myself to deliver my keynote as planned. The demo worked flawlessly, but no one cared. The headlines that evening weren't about our technology or future contracts. They were about Luther, CrossTech's new visionary CEO, complete with glossy photos and speculative analysis of how his strategic leadership would shape the company's next decade. By the next morning, the fallout was already clear. Luther called his first executive meeting as CEO-elect. I wasn't consulted on the agenda. He announced a new strategic realignment, which meant reshuffling senior leadership. Several department heads who had worked with me for years were suddenly transitioned out and replaced by people loyal to him, mostly friends from his MBA program or PR contacts with no technical background. He canceled 3 engineering initiatives mid-development, calling them too niche, and redirected the budget to marketing campaigns. Our most ambitious R&D project, a scalable autonomous infrastructure system, was paused indefinitely so Luther could focus on market visibility. I confronted him privately after the meeting. He brushed me off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're brilliant with the nuts and bolts, Oscar," he said. "But the future isn't built in server rooms. It's built in boardrooms and headlines. Let me handle that." My father didn't return my calls that week. When I finally cornered him in his office, he gave me the same speech he's given my whole life, about how leadership is about vision, not just competence. "Luther has what you don't," he told me. "He inspires people." Maybe he believed it, or maybe he just wanted to see his golden child in charge before retirement. Either way, the message was clear. My 12 years of building this company from the ground up meant nothing when compared to Luther's charm. One evening, Mason and I sat in my office long after everyone else had gone home. He had been with me since the early days, back when we were patching code on folding tables and eating takeout dinners at midnight. Before CrossTech, he'd run operations for a logistics startup that scaled from 5 hubs to 50 without a single missed SLA. He reads bottlenecks like other people read faces. They're going to drive this company into the ground, he said flatly. I didn't answer, but deep down I knew he was right. And for the first time since I joined Crosstech, I wasn't sure I wanted to be there when it happened. For a week I told myself the storm would pass. It didn't. What rattled me wasn't their ambition. It was the thought that maybe they were right about me. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal. They wanted my labor, not my leadership. And that realization, more than anything else, would shape everything that came next. 3 months after Luther was announced as the next CEO, Crosstech looked nothing like the company I had spent my adult life building. Overnight, priorities shifted from reliable engineering to market optics. Projects were rebranded and repackaged to meet investor expectations instead of technical standards. Deadlines were slashed to impress the press, not because the systems were ready. The first real crisis came from a project we called Atlas, an AI-driven infrastructure control system designed for large-scale logistics networks. It was ambitious, complex, and nowhere near ready for deployment. I'd told Luther in clear terms that launching it early would be catastrophic. He waved me off. "We need a big win for the next earnings call," he said. "You're too cautious." Atlas was pushed live 6 weeks ahead of schedule. Within days, 2 client networks crashed, halting shipping operations for tens of thousands of containers. Emergency teams scrambled to contain the fallout. Instead of accepting responsibility, Luther called an emergency company-wide meeting and blamed technical mismanagement from my division. His speech was slick and rehearsed. "Our vision is sound," he said to a room full of employees. "Execution has failed us." Behind closed doors, clients were furious. 2 major contracts were put on hold pending investigation. The engineering team worked around the clock to patch systems and restore functionality. I refused to let them shoulder the blame, but Luther's narrative had already taken root. In meetings, he spoke of me as if I were a relic, a brilliant mind who didn't understand where the market was heading. Martin echoed the same sentiment, calling me essential but inflexible. The tension came to a head at the next board meeting. I arrived prepared with data, failure reports, QA warnings, and evidence showing Luther had overruled engineering sign-offs. As soon as the meeting started, I laid everything out. "Atlas failed because it was forced out before it was ready," I said. "Our own documentation shows repeated warnings ignored. If this continues, we'll lose more than contracts. We'll lose our credibility." Luther didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Oscar's perspective is valuable, but we can't afford to be paralyzed by fear. The industry is moving fast. He's not adapting." He turned to the board. "We need leadership that understands speed matters as much as precision." Martin cleared his throat. "I agree with Luther. Innovation isn't about playing it safe. Oscar, you're invaluable on the technical side, but leadership requires vision. We need you focused where you excel." The message was clear. I was being sidelined. The board voted to limit my authority to day-to-day operations only. All strategic decisions would now require Luther's approval. I left the meeting with no power to stop what was coming. Over the next several weeks, things worsened. Luther reorganized the engineering department without consulting me. Entire teams were moved under new managers. Budgets I had approved were frozen or redirected to marketing. More troubling was the sudden appearance of an internal audit, something Martin insisted was routine. It was anything but. The audit team asked targeted questions about Atlas, about budget overruns, about missed deadlines. All things that were either beyond my control or directly caused by Luther's interference. At first, I thought it was sloppy oversight. Then I saw the draft report. It claimed that failures on multiple projects were due to negligence in operational oversight. My department, my responsibility. The language was crafted to paint me as incompetent. Mason brought me the final report 2 weeks later. "They're building a case," he said. "They're going to fire you." I didn't want to believe him, but he was right. In late August, a special board session was called under the pretense of addressing operational leadership concerns. When I entered the conference room, the atmosphere was cold and deliberate. Cameras and media crews were already assembled outside. Martin and Luther sat side by side at the head of the table. Their PR team had pre-briefed friendly reporters under embargo, timed to the board vote. Martin started with rehearsed politeness. "Oscar, we appreciate everything you've done, but recent operational failures have damaged our reputation. The board has concluded that leadership changes are necessary." I kept my voice steady. "Those failures happened because projects were launched without proper clearance. I have documentation." Luther cut me off. "Documentation doesn't change the results. Clients are unhappy. Deadlines were missed. We need accountability." The board voted. It wasn't even close. My termination was classified as for cause, a legal maneuver that stripped me of my severance package, stock options, and retirement benefits. A security team entered the room before I could even collect my notes. As they walked me out of the building, flashes from photographers lit the lobby. News alerts hit my phone before I reached the parking lot. Crosstech ousts longtime COO amid operational failures. The narrative was already written, and it was ugly. Outside, Mason was waiting with a cardboard box containing my personal items. "I'm done too," he said. "If they think this company can run without you, they're out of their minds." In the following days, the fallout spread quickly. Clients called to express concern, but stopped short of offering support. Former colleagues avoided me entirely, fearful of being associated with someone branded as incompetent. It was clear that Luther's smear campaign was working. My reputation, once built on results and reliability, was now tied to public failure. But beneath the humiliation and anger, one fact remained clear. I had spent 12 years turning Crosstech into an industry leader. I knew its technology better than anyone alive. And deep down, I knew they hadn't seen the last of me. The weeks after my firing felt like freefall. Headlines dissected my downfall in brutal detail. Industry analysts called me outdated, difficult, and unsuited for leadership. Panelists speculated I'd sabotaged Crosstech's future with ego-driven decisions. Luther fueled the fire in every interview. "Oscar's a great technician," he told one network, "but leadership requires vision. Some people just aren't built for it." The message was clear. I was finished. When my phone finally rang, it wasn't a job offer. It was Martin. "Don't embarrass the family," he said. "No press, no public comments. Remember who gave you everything." Before I could respond, he hung up. A few hours later, Luther sent a message of his own. "Don't bite the hand that fed you." The calls that used to flood my inbox stopped. Prospective employers canceled interviews. Clients I'd personally brought to Crosstech declined to meet. Even old colleagues avoided me. Some out of loyalty to Luther, others out of fear. Crosstech's reach was long, and I had become radioactive. The only person who refused to disappear was Mason. He showed up to my apartment most days, coffee in one hand and strategy documents in the other. "You're not done," he kept saying. "You're just untethered." It took time for the words to land, but when they did, we started talking about what we still had, not what we'd lost. There were days I opened a blank notebook and closed it again. Starting over wasn't brave. It was terrifying. But staying small to make them comfortable felt worse. We spent hours reviewing my early work, the patents I'd filed before Crosstech existed. They were mine alone, and they formed the backbone of the company's current systems. Crosstech had licensed them, but that license would expire in 18 months. Without renewal, their entire infrastructure would be legally compromised. It wasn't revenge. It was leverage. The decision to build something new wasn't a dramatic epiphany. It started with a single question. What if we did this differently? We knew that if I tried to launch a company under my own name, Crosstech would crush it before it took its first breath. So we built it in the shadows. In early September, we called it Helix Systems. On paper, it was owned by a holding company registered offshore. My name appeared nowhere. Officially, I was a technical consultant. Employee equity was issued at the operating company level. The holding company simply masked beneficial ownership until the mandatory disclosure. Mason handled operations, and Lena Voss, a venture capitalist with a long-standing grudge against Martin, provided the initial capital. Years earlier, Martin froze her fund out of Crosstech's Series B after she refused a pay-to-play term sheet, and then took her diligence and shopped it to a rival. Lena doesn't forget debts. We reached out to a handful of engineers who'd left Crosstech after Luther's takeover. All of them signed on. The team was small but lethal, people who understood the technology at a foundational level and were hungry to prove a point. Word spread quickly through the industry about a mysterious new startup developing next-generation infrastructure AI. Nobody knew who was behind it. Analysts speculated about a foreign sovereign wealth fund. Some thought a private equity firm was positioning for an acquisition. Luther scoffed publicly, calling Helix a glorified consultancy trying to punch above its weight. 2 weeks later, Martin called me again. "If you're involved in this Helix nonsense," he warned, "walk away now. Everything you know, every skill you have, exists because of this family. Don't mistake what we built for something you can replicate." I said nothing. He hung up before I could. Our first big opportunity came faster than expected. Nexus Freight, one of Crosstech's former flagship clients, reached out discreetly. They'd lost millions during the Atlas system debacle and were desperate for a stable alternative. We pitched them a pilot solution, one that outperformed anything Crosstech could currently offer. 6 weeks later, Helix signed a $50 million contract with Nexus. The announcement rippled through the industry. No one knew who we were, but suddenly, the mysterious new startup had a marquee client, and Crosstech had a very public problem. The results spoke for themselves. Helix's platform reduced Nexus's infrastructure costs by 30% and improved operational speed by 40%. Trade publications praised the system as the most promising infrastructure innovation in a decade. Still, no one connected the dots back to me. Martin's next call wasn't polite. "If you're behind this," he snarled, "you're stabbing your own family in the back." A day later, I received a letter from Luther's legal team accusing me of competing against my inheritance and threatening action. It was empty bluster. On paper, I didn't own a thing. We ignored it and kept building. By the end of the quarter, Helix had a growing client base, a steady revenue stream, and industry analysts calling it the dark horse challenger to Crosstech. The family that thought they had erased me from the industry had no idea I was already back, and stronger than ever. They still believed I was finished. That belief would be their first mistake. Helix's rapid rise caught Crosstech off guard. Their leadership dismissed us as an upstart at first, but once Nexus Freight's results became public and 2 more contracts were rumored to be in negotiation, the tone shifted from arrogance to hostility. The first shot came in the form of a lawsuit. Luther's legal team filed a 140-page complaint accusing Helix of stealing Crosstech's proprietary code and trade secrets. Press releases labeled us a rogue operation built on stolen IP. The media ate it up, and the story trended for days. But when the case hit court, their argument fell apart. Our documentation showed every core element of our platform was patented years before Crosstech existed, and that those patents were filed under my name. With no ownership of that intellectual property and no evidence linking Helix to any wrongdoing, the judge swiftly denied their request for a preliminary injunction. The court dismissed the case in full later. Trading didn't recover. By the close, volume had tripled the 30-day average. The ruling was a blow. Crosstech's stock dropped 14% in the following week, and investor calls leaked online showed board members furious about baseless legal theatrics. Still, Luther doubled down. If he couldn't win in court, he'd try to destroy us in the court of public opinion. Within days, anonymous reports appeared online, warning of critical security vulnerabilities in Helix's infrastructure. A handful of industry blogs published them without verification. Several potential clients paused their talks with us. It was obvious where the smear was coming from. The reports were written using internal Crosstech terminology. We responded immediately. Mason hired an independent cybersecurity firm to conduct a full system audit. A Phase 1 assessment released within days found no critical vulnerabilities, and a full audit a month later concluded our security protocols exceeded industry standards. We published the Phase 1 summary immediately and the full report on release, along with evidence that the original rumor was seeded by a PR agency tied directly to Crosstech. The backlash was swift. Several outlets appended corrections. A few issued formal retractions. Crosstech's credibility took another hit, and the SEC quietly launched a review of their competitive practices. While they scrambled to manage damage control, we focused on expansion. Helix closed deals with 2 Fortune 500 clients, one in telecommunications and one in energy infrastructure. Our technology wasn't just matching Crosstech, it was outperforming them. Then came the opportunity that would put us in direct collision with them. A $300 million federal defense infrastructure contract. It was the biggest deal of the year, and both companies were shortlisted. Luther couldn't hide his frustration. At a tech conference, he dismissed Helix as some anonymous startup trying to punch above its weight. But behind closed doors, he launched an aggressive campaign to uncover who was behind us. Internal documents later leaked, showing Martin calling us parasites feeding on our work, and Luther referring to us as thieves living off our legacy. Their desperation escalated. Crosstech operatives attempted to bribe a Helix junior analyst to leak system documentation. We caught the attempt, documented every communication, and handed it to federal regulators. The result: a formal investigation into Crosstech's corporate conduct and new scrutiny on all their government bids. Even as they flailed, Helix kept climbing. Our proposal for the defense project was stronger, more innovative, and more secure. In late October, we received a conditional award pending security clearance. Effectively a win, but not yet finalized. By noon, it was on every trading desk. 2 sell-side notes called it a regime shift. Trade headlines read, "Helix defeats Crosstech for government megadeal." Analysts openly speculated if Crosstech's dominance was finally ending. The victory triggered panic in their boardroom. Internal memos showed senior executives blaming Luther's leadership for their losses. Investors demanded an emergency meeting. The pressure mounted, and then came the moment no one could ignore. Government security protocols required Helix to disclose its ownership structure before the contract could be finalized. We'd anticipated this. Mason and I agreed to comply, knowing what would happen next. Within hours, the disclosure leaked. Oscar Cross, founder and controlling shareholder, Helix Systems. The industry exploded. Headlines dominated every major news outlet. Fired COO secretly built Crosstech's fastest rising competitor. Betrayed executive orchestrates industry takeover. The story spread beyond tech media into mainstream coverage. Business shows replayed clips of Luther dismissing Helix as irrelevant, now juxtaposed with our string of victories. Within a day, 3 top 10 clients put renewals on hold, and by Tuesday's close, the stock was down 27%. Shareholders demanded leadership changes, calling Luther an amateur who failed to see the threat. Martin was forced to issue a statement calling the revelation a betrayal of family trust, a statement that only fueled public sympathy for me. Inside Crosstech, the board called 2 emergency sessions in 3 days, and senior staff started forwarding resumes. Analysts predicted a hostile takeover. Industry insiders called it the most humiliating reversal in corporate tech history. And through it all, I stayed silent, letting the headlines speak for themselves. The reveal led every business show for 48 hours. Crosstech's investor hotline crashed under call volume. By the time the weekend news cycle ended, my face was on every business channel. Martin called me first. His voice shook with anger. "You've humiliated this family. You're spitting on everything we built. Do you think the Crosstech name means nothing?" I stayed quiet. He filled the silence himself. "You are a traitor, Oscar. You'll regret this." He hung up before I could answer. Luther took a different approach. A press conference. Cameras flashed as he leaned into the microphones, smirking with the confidence of a man who still thought charm could hide weakness. "Oscar didn't build Helix," he said. "He stole it. Every success Helix claims is rooted in Crosstech intellectual property. He's trying to hijack the family legacy for himself. But Crosstech is bigger than one bitter man." The markets didn't believe him. 2 days later, after Luther's Thursday presser, shares plunged another 19%. Helix's private valuation, based on new investor interest, nearly doubled overnight. Their next move was legal. Luther's lawyers filed 3 new lawsuits in different jurisdictions, each claiming I'd breached contracts or stolen trade secrets. Mason called it a shotgun approach. Lena called it desperation. Our legal team dismantled the suits one by one. Judges dismissed them within weeks, citing lack of evidence. Each failure bled Crosstech of money and credibility. Still, Luther refused to let go. He ordered HR to approach Helix engineers with massive salary offers, double their current pay in some cases. A handful listened. None left. Our retention rate held because Mason and I had structured Helix differently from the start. Employees didn't just get salaries. They got equity. They had a stake in the company's future, and they knew I'd built the culture on loyalty, not politics. One evening, Mason dropped a stack of resumes on my desk. "These aren't poached. They're volunteers," he said. "Crosstech engineers. They want out." By the end of the quarter, Helix had hired 50 former Crosstech staff. It wasn't just growth. It was a siphon. Crosstech's clients followed the same pattern. The defense deal opened doors. Within months, we closed contracts with a major telecom provider, 2 regional power grids, and a financial services giant. Each time, Crosstech had been the incumbent. Each time, we beat them. The breaking point came in late Q4 with Omnisat Communications, a multinational with $1 billion infrastructure contract. Luther had been grinding on a renewal since August. In November, our team made a counterpitch. We showed Omnisat our platform's cost savings, stability, and scalability. They listened. A week later, Crosstech lost the contract it had counted on to stabilize its balance sheet. The fallout was immediate. Crosstech's valuation fell below $1 billion for the first time in years. Investors publicly demanded Luther's removal. Analysts predicted bankruptcy within 12 months unless drastic changes were made. But Luther wouldn't yield. He doubled down on personal attacks, calling me a parasite feeding off family blood in interviews. Martin, older and weaker, added his voice, claiming I had abandoned duty for ego. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 men who had erased my future now begging the world to believe I'd stolen theirs. As Crosstech spiraled, Helix surged. We opened new offices in San Francisco and Washington. Our staff crossed 400. Demand for our systems was so high that Lena had to turn down several investors who wanted in. The narrative had flipped. Crosstech was dying. Helix was inevitable. But victory wasn't just about contracts. It was about perception. And perception cut deep when an internal Crosstech memo leaked. The document detailed board discussions about Luther's leadership, calling him reckless, unqualified, and the greatest liability to the company's survival. The memo spread across industry channels in hours. Luther tried to spin it as fake news. No one bought it. That same week, Crosstech's largest institutional shareholder announced support for a board shakeup. Pressure mounted. The final blow came from inside their own house. The regulatory investigation into Crosstech's sabotage attempts uncovered evidence of bribery tied directly to senior executives. Fines were issued. A compliance probe was opened. Lawsuits piled on. Luther's grand strategy of lawsuits and smear campaigns had backfired so spectacularly that even his allies abandoned him. Crosstech's market share collapsed. Clients were leaving in droves. Engineers were resigning in waves. The company was bleeding out in public view. Martin collapsed under the strain, literally. A stress-induced heart attack forced him into medical leave. Luther remained in the CEO chair, but his power was hollow. With each passing week, Crosstech's value shrank, while Helix's dominance grew. By the end of the year, the scoreboard was undeniable. Helix controlled nearly half the contracts Crosstech once held. Crosstech's valuation had fallen 70%. Our growth curve projected unicorn status in under 6 months. That's when the whispers began. Maybe the only way to save Crosstech was to sell. Investors floated the idea of merging with Helix to salvage what remained. It was unthinkable to Luther. But for the first time, it wasn't unthinkable to the board. The war wasn't over. But for the first time since my firing, it was clear which side was winning. It was a Tuesday morning when my father and brother arrived. No appointment, no notice, just a message from reception. Martin Cross and Luther Cross are here. They insist on seeing you. For a second, I considered telling security to escort them out, but I told them to wait and made them sit in the lobby for 40 minutes while I finished a meeting with investors. When I finally stepped into the conference room, they were both standing. Martin looked older than I remembered, thinner, paler, the weight of the past year carved into his face. Luther, on the other hand, was dressed like nothing was wrong, still clinging to the illusion of control. "Oscar," Martin began, voice trembling. "We need to talk." I walked past them without a word and took my seat at the head of the table. "You have 5 minutes," I said flatly. "Make them count." Martin started with a speech I'm sure he'd rehearsed. He spoke about legacy, about family, about the empire our grandfather started. He called Crosstech our blood and claimed I was still part of that legacy. Luther chimed in, leaning forward with a smug half-smile. "You're only where you are because of us," he said. "Don't forget that. Without Crosstech, you're nothing." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that made them both flinch. "Nothing? Without me, your company wouldn't exist. The patents you rely on are mine. The systems your clients use are mine. And the contracts you're losing? Also mine. You tried to erase me, and now you're begging me to save you. Let that sink in." Luther's jaw tightened. "We're willing to discuss a partnership," he said. "A merger. 50-50. 50-50? I leaned back in my chair. "You're a company weeks from insolvency. Your clients are leaving, your investors are fleeing, and your stock is barely above penny status. You don't get to negotiate terms here. You're not equals. You're prey." Martin looked like he'd swallowed glass. "Please," he said quietly. "I built Crosstech from nothing. I don't want to see it die. If you care about this family..." "Family?" I cut him off. "When you stripped me of everything I built, was that family? When you told the world I was incompetent, was that family? When you called me a traitor on national television, was that family? Don't stand here now and pretend blood excuses betrayal." The room went silent. Martin stared at the floor. Luther tried another tactic. Anger. "You think you've won? You think crushing us makes you powerful? You're still my brother, and this is still our company. You owe it to us." I stood and walked slowly around the table until I was inches from him. "I owe you nothing," I said quietly. "You took everything from me and expected me to crawl back. But I didn't crawl. I built something better. And now, here's what's going to happen." I placed a folder on the table and slid it toward them. Option A. Crosstech merges into Helix. I take 80% control, install my own leadership, and restructure everything. You'll keep token positions, nothing more. Option B. You refuse, and I let the company bleed out. Bankruptcy within 6 months. Your name disappears from the industry forever, and your license clock has 11 months left. Operating on my patents after that is untenable. Those are the only options you'll ever get." Martin's hands shook as he opened the folder. Luther didn't even touch it. "This is humiliation," he spat. "No," I said. "This is accountability. Humiliation is what you did to me. This is me offering you a way to walk away with something instead of nothing." They argued, of course. They threatened lawsuits, hinted at regulators, even tried to appeal to my conscience. None of it mattered. Every attempt to claw back control only made them look smaller. When the threats turned to pleas, I knew they were finished. 2 days later, the Crosstech board held an emergency vote. Faced with collapsing revenue, shareholder lawsuits, and an imminent delisting, the decision was unanimous. Crosstech would merge into Helix Systems. The company I had built from the shadows now consumed the company that had cast me out. The announcement dominated every business headline. Analysts called it the most one-sided merger in tech history. Employees cheered the move, investors poured in, and signage changed within a week. The full legal rebrand to Helix Global finalized over the next quarter. Martin sent a final message before the merger was finalized. "I hope you're proud of yourself." "Yes, I am," I replied. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing in their shadow. They were standing in mine. The official merger took less than 60 days, but the transformation that followed was absolute. Crosstech no longer existed, at least not as anyone remembered it. The press called it a takeover. Investors called it a rebirth. To me, it was justice. Not revenge, not bitterness, just the inevitable result of arrogance meeting reality. The first order of business was restructuring. Entire departments were dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. Outdated systems were scrapped. Legacy projects that had been losing money for years were terminated within weeks. I wasn't interested in patching up a sinking ship. I was building something worthy of the future. Mason was officially named Chief Operating Officer, exactly where you put the guy who once scaled 50 distribution hubs without missing an SLA, owning day-to-day operations with the same precision that fueled our startup days. Lena Voss accepted a seat on the new board, her strategic mind proving invaluable as we navigated Helix Global's aggressive expansion plans. Together, we created a leadership team that valued innovation over politics, performance over ego. The cultural shift was immediate. Meetings that used to be filled with corporate posturing turned into strategy sessions where ideas actually mattered. Engineers who had once been sidelined under Luther's leadership were now given budgets and freedom to innovate. Projects that had been suffocated under bureaucracy were greenlit and accelerated. Productivity surged, morale skyrocketed, and clients, many of whom had left during Crosstech's decline, started coming back. For Martin and Luther, the new order was a bitter pill to swallow. After months on medical leave, Martin announced his retirement days before the merger was finalized, though everyone knew the board had forced his hand. He released a carefully worded statement about pursuing new challenges and disappeared from public view. Luther, on the other hand, refused to go quietly. He fought the restructuring at every step, insisting on meetings, questioning decisions, and throwing tantrums when his influence was ignored. Eventually, I gave him something he couldn't argue with, a new title, Brand Ambassador. It came with no decision-making power, no board seat, and no influence over operations. He was a mascot now, rolled out at conferences and trade shows to smile for cameras and read scripts written by other people. He tried to quit, but the merger terms left him with few options. His equity was locked in, and walking away would cost him millions. So he stayed, humiliated, powerless, and irrelevant. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who once told the world I was just a technician was now the public face of a company he didn't control. The man who'd called me replaceable was now the one being replaced. Industry publications called it the most poetic corporate downfall of the decade. Helix Global's growth was explosive. Within 6 months of the merger, we had doubled our client base and secured 3 new government contracts. Our market share soared past 60%, and analysts projected we would dominate the infrastructure AI sector for the next decade. The company that had tried to destroy me was now the beating heart of an empire I controlled. The media loved the story. Every major outlet wanted an interview. I turned most of them down, but eventually I agreed to one, a primetime sit-down with Business World Weekly. The interviewer asked all the expected questions about strategy, leadership, and technology. But then he leaned forward with the one that mattered. "Does this feel like revenge?" I paused before answering. "They tried to erase me from my own legacy," I said. "Now I own theirs." The quote made headlines across the industry. It wasn't anger, it was fact. Every decision, Every sleepless night, every sacrifice had led to that moment. A future where my name wasn't whispered behind closed doors or buried in footnotes. It was on the front of buildings, in boardrooms, and on contracts worth billions. But it wasn't just about winning. It was about rewriting the story. My story. The betrayal that was meant to break me had become the foundation of everything I'd built. The humiliation that was supposed to end my career had become the catalyst for something far greater. 6 months later, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Helix Global's new headquarters, a towering glass structure that overlooked the city skyline. Below me, the streets buzzed with the movement of a company that was no longer defined by the past. It wasn't Crosstech anymore. It wasn't a family business run by entitlement and ego. It was something sharper, smarter, stronger, built on merit, vision, and relentless execution. Mason walked into the office with a final report. "We're ahead of projections again," he said. 3 new clients signed this week. One of them is Omnisat's biggest competitor. I nodded, eyes still fixed on the skyline. "Good. Let's keep going." "Do you ever think about them?" he asked. "Martin. Luther." "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not with anger." They made their choices, and I made mine. As he left, I turned back to the view. 12 years ago, I'd walked into Crosstech believing I'd spend my life building someone else's dream. They'd underestimated me, betrayed me, discarded me. And now, every piece of their legacy, every system, every client, every dollar belonged to me. The empire that once rejected me was mine now, restructured, reborn, and unstoppable. The name above the skyline wasn't Crosstech, it was Helix Global. And for the first time, it was exactly where it should be, under my name, under my leadership, and under my control. The betrayal hadn't ended my story. It had written the first chapter of something far greater. And this time, there was no one left to stand in my way. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.